Welcome to the Warrenton United Methodist Church podcast. As followers of Christ, we connect with our community and each other through compassionate service, authentic relationship, and life-giving worship. Each episode invites you into that mission, a space where faith deepens, hope grows, and God's love moves among us. Wherever you're listening from, we're grateful to share this journey with you. Let's begin.
So it has been 6 years since I stood up to preach. A little bit of a hiatus. And for somebody who likes to talk as much as I do, that's a little bit of a miracle. And Ashley knows that about me. So when we were talking about this, she let me know that I had 20 minutes to speak. And I told her that's not actually a thing. So I really will need about 30 minutes. And so we talked about it for a few minutes, and we came to a compromise at 21 minutes. So I've just used one. So as long as we're having a good time together this morning, I think we'll be good. Amen. I did bring something with me this morning. This is the first Bible after I decided to follow Jesus that I used. It's a King James, so it's the first of two foreign languages that I failed out of. But it's full of highlights and notes and underlines. And as I was preparing for this message, I had a chance to really reflect on that through this Bible and others that followed it, about all of the different seasons that I've experienced over the last 30 years, so many ups and downs, and just looking at all of it, I could see very clearly how God had worked it all together, right? That through the difficulties and the mountaintop experiences, He was there the whole time, just weaving everything together, and ultimately pointing me to the season that I am in right now. And it really all kind of culminates in this one question, this series of questions. And I want to pose one of them to you this morning. You don't have to answer this out loud, but I do want you to kind of sit with it, and especially when you go out those doors later today. When was the last time you had a real conversation with your neighbor? And I don't mean a wave from the driveway or a thumbs up emoji or a nod to somebody you recognize in the Starbucks. I'm talking about eye to eye, real contact, I care about your life kind of conversation. I think that's a difficult question for a lot of people to answer in that way. And here's the thing. That question is not really a social experiment, right? It's actually a crisis. And the crisis is called loneliness. And that's not me. That's according to the U.S. Surgeon General. Loneliness is a national public health epidemic, he said, right? Not a trend, not a concern, but an epidemic. He said lacking social connection carries health risks equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes every single day. 15 cigarettes a day. That's what isolation is doing to people who look perfectly normal to us on the outside, right? More than half of American adults say they feel isolated, right? That's half, let's say this half, right, of the congregation feels left out. And let's talk about young adults between 18 and 25. Right, the most connected generation in history. 61% identify as seriously lonely. 61%. Seriously alone. So what is going on? Well, we scroll, we argue online, we pick sides, we build walls, we retreat into our tribes, and we call that community. Surrounding ourselves with people who think like us, people who vote like us, look like us, and the whole time the person right next door to us is suffering and loneliness and isolation, right? We're living in a time that feels like a lot of chaos, isolation. We hear a lot of talk about hate and division. Everything is moving so fast, it feels totally volatile, right? But is it new? Is it new? It's not. In fact, 2,000 years ago, a man walked up to a teacher and asked a question that still lands like a hammer today. Who is my neighbor? We just heard the passage read, verse 25. On one occasion, an expert in the law, the lawyer, stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Now, don't miss the setup here, right? This is not an honest question, right? Luke tells us that the man stood up to test Jesus. He's not curious. He's not humble. He's trying to trap the teacher, right? To discredit him, to kind of catch him saying something wrong. Jesus being Jesus, he turns it right back on him with a couple of questions, and then the lawyer answers correctly. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Verse 28, Jesus says, you have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. And then, here it is. This is the verse that we're going to camp out on today. This is the question that sometimes keeps me up at night. But he wanted to justify himself, the lawyer. So he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Now, that's not some casual inquiry, right? That is an attempt to define the limits of love. Okay, this lawyer wanted to justify himself. He wanted to confirm that his circle was the right size. He wanted like a theological permission slip to love some people and be excused from loving other people. He didn't ask the question because he wanted to expand his love. He asked it because he wanted to limit it. And I feel compelled to share with you guys this morning, I think that lawyer is alive and well in 2026. I think he lives in our phones. I think he shows up at our dinner tables. He votes. He posts. He goes to church on Sunday and scrolls with contempt on Monday. And sometimes, if we're honest, he looks a little bit like us. Did you notice that Jesus doesn't answer the question directly there? And he never does when the question itself is the disease. Jesus isn't going to ask the lawyer to identify who is his neighbor as if that's what he really needs to discover. Instead, he's asking him to identify who acted as a neighbor to the man in the ditch. He's going to reframe this question entirely, and that is everything right there. Okay, that's really the whole sermon in one move. I don't know how much time I've used, but that is the whole sermon right there. The lawyer asked, who qualifies to receive my love? And Jesus answered, stop asking who deserves it and start asking if you're willing to give it. Instead of debating legal obligations, Jesus shifted the focus to mercy and action. His response didn't just redefine neighbor, it basically redefined love itself, right? And Jesus didn't say this once either. He said it before in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 and 44. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Love your enemies and pray for those who are actively working against you. That's not a suggestion or a nice little sentiment for a bumper sticker. That is a direct command, and it might be the most countercultural thing Jesus ever said in a culture that was every bit as divided and tribal as ours is today, maybe more so. He's not just expanding the definition of neighbor, he's obliterating the category of enemy altogether. So if you're commanded to love even your enemy, who's outside the circle? Nobody. There is no one outside the circle. Listen, we have been asking the wrong questions for years, decades, maybe our whole lives. Are they like me? Do they agree with me? Do they vote like me? Do they believe like me? Then maybe they qualify as my neighbor. And Jesus is essentially saying those questions are the poison. Those questions are what's killing us. Because when you spend your whole life deciding who's in and who's out, you end up in a room full of people who look exactly like you and you still feel completely empty. We started something called Shut Up and Love Your Neighbor. Sometimes people giggle at that when they hear it, but the name is not rude, I promise. It's part of the answer, actually. The shut up isn't about silencing you. It's about silencing the voice inside your head that is constantly calculating who's worth my time, my energy, my compassion, right? We want to shut that voice up and then just love our neighbor. That's the whole movement, that's the whole sermon, that's the whole parable, right? But Jesus didn't leave us with a concept. He told us a story about a man hoofing it down the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, a dangerous 17-mile, winding, steep, rocky road, known back then as the Way of Blood because of how frequently travelers were beaten, robbed, killed there. This man gets ambushed, stripped, beaten, left for dead on the side of the road. First, a priest comes along. Now, if you're Jewish and you're lying in a ditch, bleeding to death, a priest is exactly who you would want to see, right? He's religious, he's educated, he serves God, he's the establishment, the representation of everything holy. But he walks past on the other side. And then a Levite, another religious leader, a temple worker, comes along. He walks past on the other side. And then a Samaritan. Now we need to understand what that word meant in that room at that time, right? Jews especially disliked Samaritans. They considered them half-breeds. There was deep, generational, religiously justified hatred between these two groups. To the Jews, there was no such thing as a Good Samaritan. It may have well been the first oxymoron, I don't know. But that would be like Jesus making the hero the person whose yard sign made us cringe in the last election, or the person whose bumper sticker gets our blood boiling when we're in traffic, or the person whose social media profile we would never follow in a million years, right? That is the Samaritan. And what does he do? Well, I'll tell you what he doesn't do. He doesn't cross to the other side. He doesn't calculate risk. He doesn't ask the man in the ditch if he shares his theology or his politics or his zip code. He sees him, and something happens deep inside of him. Right? The Greek word is splankizomai. It's a compassion so deep, it comes from your gut, your core. It moves this guy physically. So he binds his wounds, puts the man on his donkey, which means he walks, and he takes him to an inn. He pays for his stay. And he says, if it costs more than this, when I come back through, I'll pay for it then. He didn't just show pity. He took action. He gave of his time, his effort, his money to help a stranger. True compassion sometimes comes with a cost. And the question is, are we willing to pay it? So it's at this point, Jesus asked the lawyer, which of these three was a neighbor? And the lawyer, who can't even bring himself to say the word Samaritan, says the one who showed mercy. And Jesus says two words that have haunted the comfortable and inspired the courageous for 2,000 years. Go and do likewise. Not think likewise, not feel likewise, not post likewise. Go, do. About 15 years ago, my wife Candy and I were walking down a street in downtown Frederick, Maryland. And we passed, when I would tell this story in the past, I would refer to this gentleman as homeless. I don't know that he was homeless, but he looked like he was sitting down. He looked like everything he had was with him. He was in the ditch. and we walked right past him. We arrived at the coffee shop where we were heading, just about a block or so away. And we looked at each other and we both knew, like we both felt that nudge, that pull, that we were supposed to stop. So we got our coffee and we headed back. But when we got there, he was gone. Now, I don't know where he went. I don't know his name. I don't know his story. And that's kind of the point, because we didn't ask. And that moment has never left us. It is a large part of how we ended up at Shut Up and Love Your Neighbor and a variety of other things. Because we learned something on that sidewalk in Frederick that no sermon has ever taught us. The ditch doesn't wait. The moment passes. And if we spend our whole lives intending to go back, we're going to spend our whole life arriving too late. The man in the ditch in Jesus' story is not a metaphor. He is your actual neighbor. She's the woman on your street, the guy in the cubicle next to you who hasn't smiled in months, the teenager down the street who posts happy pictures during the day and can't sleep at night. Gen Z, I'll say it again, the most digitally connected generation in human history, reports that 80% of individuals experienced feelings of isolation last year. 80%. Loneliness is linked to cardiovascular disease, depression, and suicide. And to be clear, its harm is not just to the individual. It is to the communities, the neighborhoods, the schools, our families, our churches, right? People are in the ditch right now, in our neighborhood, in your workplace, in your family, in this congregation. And we walk past on the other side of the street, not because we're bad people, but because we've been conditioned to keep moving. We've been told to mind our own business. We've been burned before. We're busy. We're tired. We're scrolling. We're afraid. The priest and the Levite weren't villains. They were cautious. They were busy. They had places to be, people who needed them, obligations that felt more important than a stranger in a ditch. Loneliness is not a personal failure. It is a collective one. We have collectively decided that efficiency is more important than presence, that being right is more important than being kind, that our tribe is more important than our town. We are watching people bleed out on the side of the road and debating who's responsible for the road. I find that debate exhausting, and I don't think I'm alone in that. The question isn't who is my neighbor. The question Jesus puts back on us is, am I willing to be one? And let me just tell you why that question matters to me. My calling is not just to be a good neighbor. It is to lead others to do the same, to build a movement of people who keep their eyes open, who stay ready, who don't walk past the man in the ditch. But here's what I need you to know, and I say this because it's true and because I think it matters. I know what it's like to be the Levite. I just told that story. We've walked past people in the ditch. And I know what it's like to be a Good Samaritan. But I also know what it's like to be the man in the ditch. I have been in that ditch more than once on my journey. Beaten up by life or circumstances or my own poor decisions, the seasons I never saw coming. And I'm sure there are people who walked past me. I know there were. But here's the thing. I couldn't tell you one of their names. Couldn't name a single person. But what I can remember is the people who did stop. Good Samaritans who got down in the ditch with me, sat beside me in the dark, waited until I was ready to get up, right? The list is long. I'm sure for many of you the same is true. Okay? And those people may not know the full weight of their impact, but I do. And that's what this is about. It's not a slogan. It's not even a sermon, really. Right? It's just one person in the ditch and another person who stops to help. The lawyer asked, "Who is my neighbor?" And with this, I'm finished. And Jesus, with the genius and grace that is entirely his own, flipped the question. He didn't define the neighbor, he described the act. Stop asking who deserves your love and start being someone who gives it. The answer came back, love God with your whole self and love your neighbor. But neighbor includes enemies. It includes people in need. It includes people who've made mistakes. Neighbor includes the person we were hoping it didn't include. Paul puts it plainly in Romans 12, verse 18, and I love this verse for a lot of reasons, but primarily because of the realism. As far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Paul is saying, you do your part. He's not saying everyone will meet you halfway or everyone will respond. We can't control that part. But what are you bringing to the table? We can't force peace, but we can be peacemakers, right? That daily, unglamorous, sometimes thankless choice to extend the hand first. That is what changes the world one relationship at a time. We can't outshout this moment. We can't out-argue the division. We certainly can't scroll our way to community or post our way to peace. But we can, one person at a time, one moment at a time, one ditch at a time, we can change the temperature of the room we're standing in just by looking up. So as it turns out, your neighbor is whoever God puts in front of you. So go and do likewise. Amen.
We're grateful you joined us for today's message from Warrenton United Methodist Church. Our prayer is that this time has strengthened your faith and reminded you that you are not alone on this journey. If today's message spoke to you, we invite you to stay connected at warrentonumc.org through worship, service, and community. Wherever you go, may God's grace guide you and God's love surround you.